That brings us to item 7.3 on the agenda, and that's an enrollment and budget update. And Dr. Smyser, I'll turn that over again to you for the introduction.
Thank you. So we have a larger group than usual because we're anticipating both a lot of enrollment questions, and so we have tonight Executive Director of Finance Dave Montoya with Budget Manager Brett, who are also becoming regulars at every board meeting as we go through this budget crisis that's been caused by a combination of COVID issues and enrollment fluctuation. And so Planning Manager Brendan Willits will be here as well with IT Application Support and Data Coordinator Betsy Westbury, so that they can talk to you about what we're seeing in our enrollment patterns, what we know and what we don't know.
Brendan, if you're trying to speak to the board, please unmute your microphone. I think you were. This is a theme this evening.
How about now?
That's much nicer. You're getting
Joys
a lot
of a
thumbs up.
headset. So thank you for having us on this evening to provide a quick update on enrollment. I'm joined this evening by Betsy Westbury, the IT Applications Support and Data Coordinator. Lauren, if you could. So not the best way to start a presentation, but I do want to point out that the slide did have an error. The one that's in front of you is correct, but the one that was provided in the packet had an error. Some numbers got messed up on the 2018-19 and 2020 years. So I will apologize for that in advance and simply move to the next slide. The overall trend is the same, but they were a couple numbers were mistakenly entered on that graph. So I'll go to the next slide. So I realize that this is a busy slide with quite a few numbers, so I'd like to draw your attention to the top 3 rows. And that's where I think a meat of the conversation is really going to take place. So what we've done is we've provided in the top 3 an overview by grade level for the 2019-20 October count, the preliminary 2020-21 numbers. And I can't emphasize this enough, these numbers are going to change between now and October count. And then on the 3rd line, we have the change from 2019 October count to current. We felt it was important to break down the numbers by grade level as it provides a more complete and total picture of the district. Specifically, it illustrates the varied impacts the current situation is having on the different age groups. You can see the elementary school being impacted the most, 1,245 down. This is actually what most of the other districts are seeing as well when I talk to some of the other planning managers or the folks who are doing enrollment and projections. The elementary seemed to take the largest hit. K specifically took a fairly large hit, and that's why it's itemized below. The high school shows an increase. That's not an error in the numbers. This too has been a trend with many of the other districts, some not as much, but we have a fairly large increase in our high school levels, and I'd let the education professionals speak to reasons why they may think that is the case. The total district right now with preliminary numbers subject to change is down about 3%, 863. When talking, there was a group of 18 different districts, and 3% was pretty typical. There were some that fared better and some that fared much worse. We've also included a line below that for PSTV. These numbers are included in the overall preliminary 2021 count. We just wanted to give that breakdown so you could see where those students are participating in the PSTV program. We did want to point out this year's preliminary count is 1718 for our K, and it's about 230 down from our projection. K is really being hit hard from every district I've talked to, and that's going to be felt for a couple of years as it creates a bubble, as we presume some of the majority of those students will come back heavy in first grade, and some will choose to stay back in the K numbers. One of the reasons we broke down the total numbers in the way we did by grade level is we also wanted to speak about the withdrawals to try to start painting a picture of where these students are going. The withdrawal data is not complete, and we really won't be able to dive deep into it until we get the firm October count numbers, and so probably not until January timeline. But I'd like to pass this off to Betsy Westbury to speak about the withdrawal specifically, and she'll take it from there.
Thank you, Brendan. If we could go to the next slide. So as you saw in the previous slide, there are 2,215 withdrawals thus far in the 2020-2021 school year. The two withdrawal codes that we focused on for this slide hold the greatest variation from a traditional school year. Withdrawals to homeschooling were averaging 74 students over the previous 3 school years. This year we're seeing 460 students withdrew from PSD to be homeschooled. Under Colorado law, in order to homeschool, a notification of intent to homeschool must be given to any Colorado Public School District office. As of October count 2019, there were 344 full-time filings for homeschool. As of last week, PSD had logged 626 full-time filings. A final report of homeschool numbers will not be finalized for the current school year until January, when the October count data is released by CDE. The next data point on the top table pertains to students who have withdrawn to attend a non-public school. The previous 3-year average shows 89 students who withdrew to attend a non-public school. The current year data reflects 350 students within that same category. The final row of data, called Other Withdrawals, includes the aggregate count of all other exit codes included in one categorization, since they are not dissimilar to a typical year's distribution of exits. You will notice in the bottom table that our highest counts of withdrawals within the current school year occur at the elementary level. Withdrawals are captured for students that either started the school year with PSD and then decided to leave, or students who finished the previous school year and did not return to PSD this school year. The data for withdrawals will not paint a full picture for kindergarten students who live in the PSD attendance area, but chose to attend a non-PSD educational setting. Simply put, if they never started in the PSD K-12 student information system, then they were never withdrawn and therefore not reflected in the data. To wrap up this slide, withdrawal numbers change throughout the year and are anticipated to increase during the school year, as that is the natural progression of data associated with withdrawals. Okay, next slide. And we wanted to add the October count process graphic that's updated for the 2020-2021 school year to show us where we are in the process of October count. It starts with master scheduling in May, and at the current point, there's a red arrow above the line with an orange circle, and we will start the count window on Thursday, September 24th. And count day this year is October 1st. So we're just about to hit that October count day, but there's a lot of work still to be done from PSD and other district associated data, and then it moves to CDE reconciliations, and then the data is distributed in January of 2021. So this is just provided to show you that we're on our way to October count, but we definitely haven't hit that mark quite yet. And so data will obviously change as we work through the next couple months. We'd like to thank you for allowing us the time to come speak to you about enrollment. We'd like to open it up for questions if you have any right now before we move on.
Great, thank you. And I saw your hand up. Go right ahead.
Yes, can you remind us how the count window works versus the count day? Is it period to make adjustments if students are not present on the count day, or what's the purpose?
Sure. So October count day is at the end of the day, we take a snapshot of data to reflect the students' enrollment, schedule, and attendance for every student participating active in Synergy. And so the students funded calculation is based off of the courses that they hold at the end of the day on count day. If the student hasn't attended on count day, then we open it up to the window. And so we look, did the student attend before count day and after count day, but within the window? And if that didn't happen, then we have the opportunity to spread that out a little bit wider from the beginning of the school year to the end of October. So essentially, we're looking for those three things to simplify it greatly. Enrollment, that they're an active and enrolled in PSD, that they've attended either count day within the window or within the larger time frame, and that they have a schedule that supports a certain level of funding.
Rob?
So on your slide that shows where withdrawals went, where are charter schools encompassed in that? And do we have a, sort of related to that, do we have any kind of idea of the counts in the charter schools, whether they've gone up or down or whatever?
We do not yet have data from charter schools.
Okay, but okay, so I get that part. That's part of the question. The other question was, to the extent that a student was currently enrolled or was enrolled in PSD and in PSD traditional schools, let's call them that, and chose instead to go to, let's say, Ridgeview or Liberty, are they reflected on this withdrawal data or not?
They would be reflected within the other withdrawals because they would have an exit code that depicts that they've moved to another district school. At this point, I can't speak specifically to the number of students that have exited from our student information system to Ridgeview or Liberty because I don't have their data to reconcile back against. I say that because sometimes a transfer within district is incorrectly coded as a transfer to a non-public school or vice versa. And that data is cleaned up once we have the ability to append the files together.
Okay, I get that. So then what's an example of a non-public school on this withdrawal slide?
Non-public schools could be any of our private or that would be a private or parochial educational settings.
Ellen, did I see your hand up? Go ahead.
So I imagine, thanks. So I imagine we know where some of these kids went because when they were disenrolled, don't the parents usually ask for a transcript to be sent to their new school? I mean, so if a kid was disenrolling, would the parent say to you, I'm going to homeschool or I'm going to send my student to XYZ school, can you please send the transcript there or their school records there? Is that how it works?
Yes, so if they went to homeschool and they were requesting a transcript to their home school, that's reflected in that 460 value that we know that those families reported that that student was leaving to be homeschooled for the current school year. The transfer to non-public schools, yes and no. There's a process that Records works through to get a confirmation of enrollment so that we can confirm that the student has either enrolled or enrolled and attended once they hit the secondary location. That is collected throughout the year, but it's not fully reconciled back until the end of year collection for that school year. So we may have some data for some of these instances, but we don't have it for all of them.
Go ahead. Or I think Rob froze.
No, I'm here. I just wanted to follow up. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly follow up on that and say I appreciate that we don't necessarily have all the data, but this year is going to be weird, or going to be more important that we understand where kids went to have some sense of whether they're going to come back, right? Because that really gets to the whole budget question of not only this year, but next year and the year after. So I guess we're going to continue to sort of dive in deeper than we would normally do.
Okay, DJ, I saw your hand up, I believe. Go ahead.
You mentioned that these are the two top withdrawals. Can you give me an idea of what other withdrawal codes you guys have?
Absolutely. I will tell you that two of the larger withdrawal codes that are collected within that other withdrawals would be transfers to a public school within Colorado and transfers out of state. Those are larger numbers than you see for the homeschool and the non-public school, but like I said while I was talking earlier, they're not dissimilar to the number that we see within a school year, which is why I was pointing out the homeschool and non-public school instead of bringing up those traditional transfer to another public school in Colorado or transfer out of state.
Thank you.
Naomi, go ahead.
All right, so thank you for this information. While the 2215 number looks scary, it's really only 117 students higher than last year, and students move around and all sorts of things happen. So this isn't that abnormal. So on the previous slide that said that we were down 863 students, that's because of the projections that we had made about enrollment for this year. Is that correct?
I'll take that, Betsy. Lauren, would you mind going back? Thank you very much. So we itemized the projections in a slightly off gray below it, but no, the 863 is down from this year's preliminary count compared to last year's actual October count. We had projected prior to the whole COVID situation, we had projected a growth, and that's why there's a larger delta for the change projected to current. But no, the 863 is not from projections. 863 is what this year's preliminary data pull indicates we are down from last year's official October count. So the withdrawal data can fluctuate, but this year we are currently down 863, and like I said, those numbers will change by October count, and I imagine will probably increase before October count is finalized.
So knowing that we're looking at 860 some, maybe more students, that seems like it's a lot of money that is going with those tiny bodies to other places. How much trouble are we in?
I would
Well,
definitely refer presentation following this.
Brendan, before you cede the floor here, could you tell us what you're hearing from your peers up and down the Front Range or anywhere else in terms of their enrollment drops? What I'm hearing from superintendents are very, very similar numbers everywhere. And I'm curious, we haven't had a chance to talk. So what are you hearing from your colleagues?
Thank you, Dr. Smyser, for the question. We are hearing at its core, it's very similar. You know, like I said, we had 18 different districts all get on the same conference call last week, and we're averaging right around 3%. Some of the smaller districts are not hit as hard. It almost seems schizophrenic in how some of the districts are being hit. There are some easy data points. Some of the districts, Aurora, for example, has some higher mobility, and they're seeing higher rates of people actually moving out of the district. That isn't necessarily the case in places like St. Vrain, Boulder, Thompson, Poudre schools, some of the Weld REs, or our neighbors to the east. But generally, everyone is seeing a dramatic drop in the K, which, you know, as we talk through, we don't have good data points for it, but anecdotal evidence, you know, if I had a kindergarten child, I probably would consider holding them at home. And so that's a fairly common theme with our conversations. Most of the districts, not all, but many of the districts that we've been talking with have seen the bump in high school, and honestly, we're not sure what that looks like yet. We're not sure if it's simply that they haven't been withdrawn from the system, or if it's going to help. There's been a lot of conversation of whether things like the online education is really going to help the dropout rate, or if it's really helping the kids and the students who are older and may have jobs. There's just a lot of anecdotal conversations. We don't really have data, and that's the problem, is we won't have data to really dive into until December, which we absolutely will. IT has a fantastic group of data analysts working for Betsy, and they do a great job pulling all the data so we can sit down and go over it. And I'm sure you guys will be seeing reports in the future. Middle school seems more hit and miss between the districts we're talking to, but we are definitely not in this alone. In fact, where we're at, as painful as it may look on the surface, is better than some of the other districts that we're talking to. But it is a similar story. Some other districts are losing kids from moving out. Some are transferring. Some have better online programs that are offered at their, or more robust online programs that are offered through their district or through a local charter. Some charters have more room, so they're losing more students. Some districts, the charters don't have enough capacity, so they're really not gleaning much from the district students. But that's generally what we're seeing. We're kind of in the middle of the pack when it comes to total numbers, percentages, and breakdowns. You know, as far as reasons, we'll have to dig into those as December and January hit and we get better information from the state. Hope that answers your question.
And I'm going to try to keep us moving, so let's get a last couple questions from Rob and DJ, and then we'll move on to the budget.
Yeah, so I just want to understand how the math works here, right? If we're down 1,000 in elementary, if we're down 1,245, right, and 229 of them effectively are kindergarten students, that leaves, I don't know, 1,000. What is that? 1,050 16 maybe, I don't know, I'm doing math in my head, right? 1,016, right? I don't think that is the difference in withdrawals from between the 2 years enough to make up 1,016? I sort of don't think so. I don't have again, the slide sort of flipped, but so where's the other 1,016, I guess is what I'm saying. Where should I look for that in these slides?
So if I sorry, I'm echoing. If I understand your question, we're showing 1,200 down. The 200 and change K are already reflected in that K, and that was actually from the projection number, the 229. So it's not a quite apples to apples comparison with 2019-20. But yes, a majority of those 1,000 kids, they're going to be found with those withdrawals. If you take the 1,200 minus a couple hundred, withdrawals are a little tricky, and I, Betsy had alluded to how they're counted, and it may not be a great data point to look at, but it's the only data point we have right now to show you, to give you a to provide us kind of a breadcrumb trail of where we're going to dig deeper, because withdrawals happen for a lot of reasons, and they happen over the year. So there's going to be more withdrawals throughout the year, not just at October count, for a myriad of reasons.
Sure,
but may have something to add on to that.
But I understand that, and I'll just say this, and then I'll do it in email or whatever. But the 1245 down, if you take out the kindergarten kids, right? For the withdrawals to accommodate the rest of that, it has to be a delta in the amount of withdrawals this year versus the amount of withdrawals last year, right? Otherwise, the math would work out to cover that, right? So maybe we can do a spreadsheet offline or something, but I'm just curious about where those numbers are and whether they add up.
Okay, we can definitely look into that, and I'm sure Betsy and I will be trying to produce some interim reports before we get the full data, and we'd love to pass those through our our supervisors and get those to the board and anyone else who's interested in seeing those.
Thank you.
One of the documents that we were also sent was the one showing the different schools, and I'm really intrigued by this 796 high school ones, and is it evenly distributed? Is it, I mean, because we're only showing like 507 for the virtual in general, so I'm just wondering where those 800 kids are at.
So I don't have the numbers, I'm sure Betsy does, printed in front of me, but they are generally fairly well distributed. We do have one high school that is actually over from last year's October count. However, comparing last year to this year, I would only warn against one thing. Some schools had higher waves of students that were leaving out of, say, 5th grade into the middle school. So they, on a school-by-school comparison, you can see drops that seem dramatic or increases that seem dramatic that aren't necessarily reflected by true number of students who are choosing a different path or choosing the PSD online. It's some of the schools have a greater change simply because they had a large or a small grade that was waving through. We haven't started the deep analysis of individual schools and dramatic changes. At least I haven't. I was planning on waiting until we got our November count from CDE to start that work, as it will take quite a bit of time and will be fairly labor intensive. So we wanted to make sure we had good numbers from CDE in the second week of November. I don't believe I saw any patterns I would want to speak to. Betsy, if you saw any patterns at the schools.
I'll just follow up with that. When we were looking at the data, we were trying to identify for the 863 down where potentially students may have gone, which is why we looked at the withdrawal data. I think that at some point, once we have a cleaner data set, we could look into enter codes for high school students to identify if there's a consistent pattern of entries for students who weren't enrolled in PSD in a previous year, to try and dig down into what's impacting that plus 796.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to say thank you. You can tell there's a lot of interest in this for good reason, so we can understand what's upon us and where it's going. So we'll really look forward to the further work you'll be doing, and we really appreciate you starting to present that data tonight.